Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our 16th Gateway College Lecture Series. We greatly appreciate your continued support and interest in contributing to the knowledge economy throughout Huron County and beyond that Gateway strives to achieve. My name is Grace Bonnet. I started working with Gateway about 4 years ago in my second summer of university as a summer research assistant, and currently I'm one of the project leads for Gateway's Be Well, Work Well project. Gateway Centre of Excellence in Rural Health is located in Goderich, Ontario. It's the only rural research institute in Canada that we know of. It's governed by community-based volunteers who aim to advance rural health teaching and research across Huron and Perth, Grey, and Bruce counties. Our mission is to improve the health and quality of life of rural residents through research, education, and communication. So beginning in February 2021, Gateway launched its first virtual lecture series. In the midst of COVID, with isolation being top of mind, there was no better time to launch this initiative. Through the lecture series, our hope is to cultivate a culture of rural health knowledge and innovation while virtually connecting communities to reduce social isolation. So today our speaker is Ashley Flanagan, who is a research fellow at the National Institute of Aging, as well as a research chair of rural diversity and aging here at Gateway. Today, Ashley will be discussing how to better support 2SLGBTQIA+ older adults living in rural areas. So thank you so much for joining us, Ashley. I'll pass it over to you and you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, and we can pass it over to the panelists as well.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Grace. I'm going to narrate as we do when we share our screen, but I'm going to, I don't have permissions at the moment. I should have checked that before we started. Jay, behind the scenes, can we?
Yeah, my mistake. I'll get right on that.
No worries. Thank you so much. Yeah, so as Grace mentioned, I'm Ashley Flanagan. I am both a research fellow at the National Institute on Aging, located at Toronto Metropolitan University, and also newly minted research chair in rural diversity and aging here at Gateway. And I am very excited to be here with you all. There we go. Oh, share. Start my presentation. Okay, and so now that we're a little bit better acquainted, I guess in line with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and in the spirit of reconciliation, I'm going to begin my time in this session by acknowledging the land on which we are each joining from. While we're all attending and participating in this event from different locations, we are all on Indigenous land. And as settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here. And we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. I am specifically located on the traditional unceded territories of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, Ottawa, Anishinaabeg, and Mississauga peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, specifically Treaty number 29, signed in 1827. And as a settler, my personal commitment is to reflect upon my own privileges and the ways that my privileges can both do harm and good. And I commit to reading, to continually unlearning and learning, and to sharing resources that explore the diverse cultures, voices, and experiences and histories of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And so I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land that you are on. And if you aren't sure, I'll share a link in the chat at the end of my presentation that can help you get a better understanding of the land on which you live, work, and play. So as Grace mentioned, and kind of in that spirit of continually learning, I'm excited to welcome you all to this first installment of this fall lecture series. And I have the great honor and pleasure to be here along with a great panel of speakers that we'll hear from in just a few moments once I kind of deliver this little level setting presentation. And so without further ado, I think we can dive in. And as I mentioned, kind of this level setting, I really always start my presentations, my talks, my lectures, whatever it is that I'm sharing, by spending some time, building that shared understanding of some of the core characteristics or key considerations. And this way, kind of no matter where we're coming from, we're able to start a discussion from a similar and shared place. So let's start off by thinking a little bit about what we mean when we think about the rural context. The Rural Ontario Institute defines rural as any municipality outside of the census or out of a census metropolitan area. So obviously, with 469 rural municipalities in Ontario, which are home to more than 2.4 million people, there's a lot of nuance that is not embedded within that definition. And as you can imagine, there's likely a great diversity in one's experiences, depending on geographic location as one of them. So with that in mind, this discussion is largely situated specifically within the context of Huron, Perth, Grey, and Bruce counties. And so to give a little bit more context about those counties, according to the 2021 census data, we can see a total of 317,232 people living in these counties. A little bit of a breakdown there on your screen. The median age of these folks is about 46. And so I'd like to break that down a little bit, given that we're all here to think about, at least in part, about aging. So 25% of the population in these counties here in Perth, Grey, and Bruce is 65 years of age or older. And that's compared to about 19% of the general Canadian population. And this is a number that we can really expect to continue to grow, I guess, kind of judging, especially based on the number of folks that are age 50 plus that you can see in the bar chart on your screen there. And so I think this is significant for a number of reasons, but specifically within the context of this discussion, specifically to do with our ability to support the growing population of older adults who are going to be calling our rural communities home. And so as we see the population of older adults who live in our rural communities continue to grow, it's also very reasonable to expect that we'll see growing diversity within this population. So zooming back out to a whole country perspective, when it comes to 2SLGBTQIA plus older adults specifically, we don't have an exact number. However, our 2021 census data does shed some light. So we now know and can see, based on the folks who responded to the census, that around 4% of the population, or about 1 million people, aged 15 and older, identify as 2SLGBTQIA+. And around 7% of that, so around 7% of 2SLGBTQIA+ Canadians are aged 65 and older. And this is compared with about 21% of non-2SLGBTQI Canadians that are 65 or older. And so I think this is a reflection of recent changes to the way that we collect sociodemographic data at the federal level. And so because of that, we're starting to get a more fulsome picture of 2SLGBTQIA+ communities in Canada. But historically, inconsistent data collection and reporting have really made it difficult to kind of get a good picture and fully understand the scope here. So often what we do is we kind of look south of the border to the United States to shed a little bit more light. And so some key stats that I like to share are, in the United States, the number of older LGBT adults is estimated to grow to about 5 million within the next decade. And it's a little bit of an outdated statistic, but almost 1 in 6 same-sex households are located outside of major cities within the United States. So that's outside of urban centers, to give us a little bit of context. And so I've been throwing around the acronym 2SLGBTQIA+, but what do I mean when I say this? This is one of the ways that we group and speak to all of the identity labels, many of which are listed here on the screen, specifically two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, asexual, and intersex, and the plus representing many other possible identifications. And while I don't have the luxury of the time to go into depth of each of all of these identity labels, I do want to spend a moment to share a little bit more about two-spirit identities. So two-spirit is an umbrella term traditionally used to distinguish Indigenous concepts of sexual orientation and gender diversity from European understandings that were violently imposed upon Indigenous communities. And so two-spirit identities, which can be a sexual identity, a gender identity, and or a spiritual identity, held a place of honor within Indigenous communities historically. And so as a way to continually demonstrate my solidarity in this time of truth and reconciliation, I joined the movement to place the 2S at the beginning of the LGBTQIA+ acronym to both center and acknowledge that two-spirit identities were among the first sexual and gender identities in what is now known as Canada. So as all of these various identifications come together to shape our individual identities, it's easy to see really how much variety and fluidity there is kind of here within and subsumed within this acronym. And this also creates unique considerations when it comes to health and well-being. And we'll get into that here as well. So now that we have that kind of language foundation, we can delve into these intersections of 2S LGBTQIA+ identities, aging, and rural contexts. And I like to start out by giving you a sense of what many of today's cohort of 2S LGBTQIA+ older adults generally are carrying as they age. So to do that, we're going to walk through some of the key historical moments that an 81-year-old 2S LGBTQIA+ person, may have experienced. So going back to the 1960s, at the age of 19, the RCMP was actively keeping tabs on patrons of gay bars in Ottawa and other countries across and other cities across the country, And so if identified, many folks faced losing their jobs, their families, being arrested and imprisoned. And then we see 9 years later, in 1969, at the age of 28, Canada decriminalizes homosexual acts between consenting adults with the passage of the Criminal Law Amendment Act. And also in 1969, we see the Stonewall riots, which occurred in Greenwich Village in New York. And these riots, which were led by trans women of color, sparked the gay liberation movement that we now commemorate as Pride Month in June. But it really wasn't until 4 years later, in 1973, at the age of 32, that homosexuality is removed from the DSM as a diagnosable psychiatric illness. But despite this removal, the World Health Organization actually continued to classify homosexuality as a mental illness until 1990. So that was another 17 years. In 1986, at the age of 45, sexual orientation is added to the Ontario Human Rights Code. Almost a decade later, in 1995, at the age of 54, the Supreme Court of Canada rules freedom from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation is protected under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. 10 years later again, in 2005, at the age of 64, the Federal Civil Marriage Act is passed, and that legalizes same-sex marriage across the country. In 2013, at the age of 72, Bill 279 officially extends human rights protections for transgender people in Canada. In 2016, at the age of 75, For the first time in Canadian history, a pride flag is raised on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. In the following year, in 2017, at the age of 76, the Bill C-16 is updates the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code to include gender identity and gender expression as protected grounds from discrimination. In 2022, at the age of 81, we see Bill C-4 officially amend the Criminal Code to ban the practice and promotion of conversion therapy in Canada. And so, as you see here, today's 2SLGBTQIA older plus, IA plus older adults have lived through a number of significant shifts in their rights and freedoms and are among some of the first to live openly with diverse sexual and gender identities in older age. And these histories can really translate into different expectations and approaches to interactions within our social lives, within healthcare, with social service providers, really depending on someone's age and their personal life history. So bringing these histories forward into our current health and social context, there are some key areas where we're kind of slowly chipping away at the gaps in knowledge and understanding. So when it comes to physical health, there's mounting evidence that suggests that 2SLGBTQIA IA plus older adults experience disproportionate physical health challenges as they may be at higher risk for some chronic conditions such as asthma or hypertension and health behaviors when compared to heterosexual older adults. I say heterosexual because unfortunately, much of the existing literature does not include trans and two-spirit older adults because data just really across the board is lacking for these communities. When it comes to sexual health, research indicates that 2SLGBTQIA plus older adults are just as likely to remain sexually active as other older adults, but rarely have their sexual health needs met in care and support settings. And additionally, 2SLGBTQIA plus older adults may be at a greater risk for contracting sexually transmitted infections and HIV later in life. And really many of these barriers to care and support and knowledge related to sexual health stem from our ageist and heterosexist assumptions about sex and old age, and the lack of inclusive sexual health education, and also biological changes. When we think about mental health, queer, trans, and two-spirit older adults may be also at an increased risk of experiencing challenges to mental health, including poor self-rated mental health, anxiety, depression, substance use. But I think when we're thinking of these challenges, it's important to recognize that once again, the social context in which folks grew up or the histories that we talked about, it's important that we acknowledge those and how repeated exposure to stigma and discrimination can have a significant impact on our physical, mental, and social health as well. And so when we're thinking about social health, some research estimates that about 53% of 2SLGBTQIA plus older adults feel isolated. So factors contributing to this might be more likely to live alone or be separated from potentially children or other familial supports or chosen family, as well as few programs and services geared towards 2SLGBTQIA plus older adults. And so when it comes to memory loss and dementia, 2SLGBTQIA plus older adults, like many other older adults, may live with various forms of memory loss, cognitive difference, or disability, including dementia. However, there may be parallels in the experience of coming into living with dementia that parallel experiences of coming out about one's gender identity or sexual orientation, as both periods can be marked by a lot of change and uncertainty or the withdrawal of networks of support. And it's also important to recognize in these contexts and more broadly, the diversity in caring relationships and that power of both formal and informal support networks. When we think about long-term care, these histories that folks are carrying with them may also influence visions of aging and subsequently long-term care that holds fear around the level of care and support that one will receive. When it comes to end of life, 2SLGBTQIA folks may also experience anxiety about end of life care and isolation potentially. So I think it's important to remember in these contexts that using a person-centered intersectional approach to how we interact with folks can help us understand someone's wishes and advocate with them to ensure dignity and autonomy in aging. So what do these experiences, or how do these experiences, intersect with folks who are living in rural communities? Well, when it comes to what is known, although limited, research kind of exists. Some of it highlights a series of challenges and opportunities. With respect to challenges, we may see many of the previously noted challenges exacerbated, such as lack of access to affirming healthcare and social services, many of which are predominantly located in larger urban centers. Many of the barriers to adequate care and support are kind of rooted in these past experiences of discrimination or fear of ongoing stigmatization, so including whether it's actual or perceived biases or knowledge gaps in the competence of service providers in the areas and needs of 2SLGBTQIA+ older adults, or making assumptions about one's identity. And these barriers or these assumptions may lead folks to avoid accessing necessary care. We can also see perceptions, whether they're real or imagined, that individuals within rural communities hold negative, so heterosexist or transphobic views of 2SLGBTQIA+ individuals. And we may also see the impact of having limited friends or biological family close by, or the lack of inclusive and affirming spaces may lead to feelings of loneliness and social isolation. But kind of on the flip side of the coin, some folks talk about having really intimate and supportive networks of support in their communities, talk about embracing or appreciating being more connected to nature, having more privacy when living in rural areas, kind of appreciating that calm and the quietness, noting that there are some quote unquote champion healthcare providers, folks that are knowledgeable and that use their role to advocate for inclusive care. Folks living in rural settings may be more likely to own their properties, and this can be seen as a financial source of security. And then we can also talk about and see the ways that technology can be leveraged, which we'll get to here in a second. As we kind of think about, okay, so where do we go from here? Now that we know a little bit more about 2SLGBTQIA+ older folks' experiences of living in rural communities. So as I mentioned, there's a number of possible ways forward, one of them being leveraging technology as ways to improve connectivity, facilitate sustainable programming and outreach for those living in rural areas. But that being said, there are some challenges. The virtual fatigue of constantly having to be in that virtual environment, varying degrees of comfort using technology, privacy concerns, the accessibility of technology and the internet. And some events are not able to be reproduced in a virtual environment. But I think it's important to note that despite these challenges, a recent study found that LGBT older adults are more likely to use technology to socialize with their friends and their support networks. And this can be highlighted in this example of where Egal Canada launched their Rainbow Table, which is hosts a virtual space for resources, guest speakers, and it's a video series that aims to foster community engagement and connects older 2SLGBTQIA plus older adults. It originated at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're hoping to see that it continues. There's always a call for more funding, and the recent announcement by the federal government for the first 2SLGBTQI plus action plan highlights a number of key areas for action. Just as an example, the first action item highlights funding for capacity building grants, project grants for 2SLGBTQI plus communities, and makes specific note of both seniors and rural communities as priority areas. So hopefully we'll see some more funding coming through. And then last, but certainly not least, and probably one of the most immediate things we can do is continually working on being better allies and advocates. That being said, becoming and being an ally to 2SLGBTQIA plus people in general and older adults is really a fluid process, of which I have some suggestions here on the screen of how we can kind of go about this. While there's no guidebook, we're always continually learning and unlearning, as I mentioned. But if we can come together, we can reflect on our own assumptions or potential biases. We come into our interactions with respect of one's identity or relationship. We stand up and we speak out about disrespect. We listen to folks, the 2SLGBTQIA plus folks, because they are the experts in their own experiences, needs, their challenges, and to continue to educate yourself. And a great first step is being here today, and also actively seeking out more resources. So I'll leave that there. I'm sure our panelists have many more suggestions and some fantastic examples of how we can work with and for and better support 2SLGBTQIA plus older adults. So without further ado, I'm gonna wrap up my time on the center stage and stop sharing my screen and invite our panelists back to the main stage. Hopefully I don't think I'm still sharing my screen. I never know. Thanks, AJ, for the thumbs up. Okay, so to start us off, while we kind of wait to see if there's any questions that pop up, I want to kind of invite each of you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe give us a little insight into what brings you here today. So for that, we'll start with Joan.
Thank you. That was a great presentation too. Thanks for that. I'm a retired teacher, and when I finished that, I went to work in Owen Sound here for the AIDS Committee of Guelph and Wellington County, currently called ARCH. They had a very part-time office here for a short time, and my mandate was to educate people about homophobia and try and get some things going. I guess it was a few years before that I, with two friends, started the Grey Bruce Pride Committee here, which I've now stepped down from. Other people have taken that on. The AIDS Committee has pulled out of the area, and that's kind of indicative of medical services in Grey Bruce, which is, by the way, the size of Prince Edward Island, more or less. It's a really big area. So when I was invited to attend this today, I thought, this is great. We need to know more and share more and hear what else is going on in other rural and remote areas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thanks, Joan.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. I think this is a great opportunity, and hopefully the start of a more robust conversation as well. With that, I think I'll pass it over to AJ.
Thanks, Ashley. My name is AJ Adams. Pronouns are he, him. I kind of give myself the label of 2SLGBTQIA+ advocate with a specific lens of rural and small towns. I sit on some national and provincial boards, and then I also do quite a bit of work as president and board chair of Stratford-Perth Pride. So I'm located here in Stratford. as well as I sit on the board of directors for the Rural Ontario Institute, so I do quite a bit of rural work. And then also another reason why I was excited to say yes to this table today is my career has been primarily within the healthcare space, currently working for one of the local Ontario health teams. And I actually met Ashley at a former job for a provincial organization that does education, training and resource development for the long-term care sector. And we did a lot of work within the 2SLGBTQ space, trying to get long-term care homes to be better with supporting that community.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. For as long a history we haven't met face to face yet, so hopefully soon. And last but certainly not least, we have Matt.
Hi, my name is Matt Hoy. I'm a municipal councillor for the town of Goderich. I'm also the executive director of the Maitland Valley Family Health Team in Goderich, which is the largest family health team in Huron County. So we serve approximately 15,000 patients. I'm also one of the founding members of Huron County Pride, which has just sort of been reintroduced into the community. Of course, I care about all healthcare, but being a member of the LGBTQI+, that is a real mouthful, community, it's near and dear to my heart. I do have some cool announcements to make later, so if you let me do that later in the presentation, that'd be great.
Absolutely. We'll save some time at the end for us all to do a little self-promotion and sharing of exciting things that are coming down the pipeline for sure. So thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourselves, why this is meaningful for you, and kind of what brings you here today. Given I think that we're chatting about rural communities, I think what would be interesting is if folks could maybe share from their perspective why, and make it really clear, I think, why focusing on rural communities is important, it's unique when it comes to supporting 2S LGBTQIA+ older adults. So that's the question. What makes this context unique from your perspective? Why are we here today? Why do we care? So I don't know. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. So if whoever wants to unmute first and go take a stab, I'm more than happy to do that. Otherwise, I'll feel comfortable calling on folks. But Matt, go for it.
I guess I would say that at least in Huron County, diversity is an issue. Not just for this community, but all minorities. Less than 4% of the county is a recognizable minority. So that's just not okay. We need to, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's not good for us financially, or we need to move forward and meet the standards and meet the same levels as the rest of the country.
Yeah, I think it's important that we do focus on kind of enhancing diversity, and I think part of that is creating spaces where folks feel welcomed, feel a sense of belonging as well. So I don't know if AJ or Joan have some additional thoughts on that. Joan does.
Yeah, I could echo what Matt says about the need for diversity and the benefits. In Grey Bruce, people like us are really isolated quite often. There's Owen Sound where I live, 22,000 people or so. But then there's Glamis and Tobermory and other really remote areas where you might feel you might even be the only 2S LGBTQI+ person, let alone older person in the community. And one of the really big needs is a social system. Kincardine Pride and Grey Bruce Pride have occasional events outside of the Pride months. But through the rest of the year, everybody's here and we don't know each other. There are, of course, little pockets of people who get together and meet each other, but there are tons of other LGBT folk who don't. They feel really isolated, and that affects physical health, mental health, social and spiritual health, the whole works. So that's the importance for me, is finding some ways to bring people together.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that is a recurring theme in the conversations that I have, is that a lot of our efforts focus on June, focus in terms of social. They focus on Pride Month, which is fantastic, and I think definitely needed, but there's 11 more months out of the year, right? Where folks want to feel welcomed, they want to feel included and connected to our communities. And that, I think, is a sentiment that cuts across the board for sure. AJ, I'm sure you have some thoughts as well.
I do. Your presentation touched on it a bit, Ashley, but I think something that's really unique to rural communities, and I talk a lot about this to some of my city colleagues, we don't have resources here. If we do, they are very small scale and are way underfunded. I think we all know health, social services, anything under those kind of support umbrellas need more funding, and often don't have the capacity or the knowledge to support 2SLGBTQ folks. So I know Stratford-Perth Pride often gets messages, almost like we're a social worker saying, I'm looking for social outings, I'm looking to connect with other people, I'm looking for, I'm myself or a loved one is starting transition, or I just came out and after 30 years of marriage, I need therapy and support. We don't know always where to point folks, but often when we do, it ends up being in places like Kitchener-Waterloo or London. So there's definitely opportunities for us as the 4 counties of Midwestern Ontario that we represent here on the panel, to really expand on the services that are offered within our own jurisdiction instead of shipping people off. And as we know, transportation is an issue in this area as well. And so I'm really excited to see the new federal action plan, and hopefully there's some pieces within that can really support our communities. And
I think I might continue the conversation there, since you kind of created a nice little segue for the new federal action plan. Some of the things you mentioned, obviously funding, and so that's one of the key things that are offered by this action plan, and mentioned transportation and just having funding for services kind of within our communities rather than kind of outsourcing. Are there any other areas that we think should be prioritized in terms of funding? So I think we've touched on a couple, but any other ideas in terms of where should our focus be? I guess the actual heart of that question is there's so many things that need to be addressed. I think that are definitely resonating in all of your comments. Where do we start? Go for it, Joan.
I think one specific need, excuse me, is in the long-term care, seniors, later in life, congregational housing, I guess. I know when I interviewed people for older LGBT people recently for a book, that's one of the big fears is what's going to happen now. I'm single and I don't feel I can care for myself anymore, or if my partner needs to be cared for more than I can, or vice versa. What's going to happen when one of us moves into one of those places, as I often call them? I know that things are changing, but it's not made public, at least as far as I can find out. And I think some kind of funding for some kind of training for staffs in LTC and nursing homes would be important to a lot of us.
Yeah, I think, go for it, AJ.
Sorry, I was just going to piggyback off Joan. And I think along those lines too, specifically training and education around supporting those who have memory loss and dementia. So there was a new research study that came out, I think last week, that the number of Canadians who will be living with dementia is supposed to triple by 2050. So we could probably assume that also means the number of 2SLGBTQ older adults living with dementia is supposed to triple by 2050. So that means there's a lot more people that we need to support care for. And Ashley, I know your work kind of focuses in this realm, so I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's a very unique experience dealing with that specific set of a population. So supporting folks who are living with dementia or other cognitive situations, or just to Joan's point, anyone living in congregated living, whether it's long-term care or supportive living, really needs to be a focus in this.
Absolutely. And you really, both of you set me up pretty nicely for a little bit of promotion in terms of education resources that are out there within the context of supporting folks living with dementia. You can check out EGAL Canada. I think the work, I'm trying to remember I can't remember the URL right off the top of my head, but there are some resources out there in terms of e-modules for folks that are in the health and social service care provider role, but also community members and folks that are supporting in kind of a more of an informal role as well, so that we can be there for folks when they need us in our communities. Because I think one of the things that 2SLGBTQIA+ folks do really well is we support each other. We're there for each other. And so I think having the resources to show up as our best selves to support folks who are living with dementia or who are caring for someone who is living with dementia is also something that we need as well. So I think in any conversation, when we think about aging, a lot of our focus turns on to long-term care, turns on to what's going to happen when I need that extra support, and I can't do it myself, or my partner can't support me, or I can't support my partner or my chosen family who I'm living with or supporting in some way. And so, yeah, I think funding for that and kind of building resources and a network for folks is important, and also making it clear where to look, right? I think that there's some pretty great resources out there, but folks don't know where to look, right? And we're not supported in navigating a system that is not super accessible and is not very intuitive when it comes to finding the resources that folks need when they need them as well. So that absolutely, I think, is something that we should be prioritizing when it comes to funding, for sure. And I think in addition to funding, and we're talking about supporting folks and talking about how our communities are particularly inclined to support each other. But if we want to extend that network and think about general community, general population, and what could be done to support or enhance support for 2SLGBTQIA+ folks, number one, what can we do? And number two, why is it so important when we think of taking like a community-wide approach to support?
The first thing that kind of comes to my mind, and this is something I'm personally a big advocate for, is things around language and knowledge. So pride spaces and queer spaces are very catered to young people. So when we talk about things like language, like you have that slide, Ashley, that had all the different identities. Matt and Joan, feel free to interject and correct me, but from the conversations I've had with a lot of older adults, they have a harder time staying up to date, if you will, with a lot of the newer identities and just the language of the community, because they're often not invited into a lot of 2SLGBTQ spaces, just because that's who we cater to. And then also there's that rural lens to it, where we're a lot slower than the cities when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So I keep up to date with a lot of the language because I have a lot of contacts in Toronto and Ottawa that I chat to, and I'm constantly learning about different gender identities and sexualities and whatnot. So I'm able to bring that. But if we're not including 2SLGBTQ older adults, then there's going to be that gap of being able to support them. And I've chatted with a lot of older adults who say, oh, I just use the term gay, but when I'm chatting with them, it's like, oh no, you're actually some other identity based on the definition. Everyone has the right to choose what fits them. But because they've never really been exposed to some of these other identities, they've never had an opportunity to explore what that can mean for them.
Totally. I think the language part is while in efforts to be inclusive and fluid and ever evolving, is also a barrier in some cases where folks, in terms of their own identity, don't necessarily have the language to kind of communicate who they are and what's important to them, but also a barrier in the sense that not wanting to use the wrong language or like the outdated language as well, and keep updated, whether that's within the 2SLGBTQIA+ community or broader communities as well. And I saw Joan unmuted.
Yeah, sorry if I'm jumping in too often here. There's another idea too that's a little bit contrary to what AJ said, and it's more personal and local. It's not based on big research, but it is great to be invited into regular spaces and be welcomed as a member of the LGBT community. That's wonderful. We also need space to gather on our own. We like each other, you know, and we like to get together. But often I find when at I'll say pride events, I guess, because that's most of what happens here. Although there are a couple places in Owen Sound that occasionally throw an event through the year, but it's mostly allies who go, which is great. We need allies, but we also need space for ourselves. And sometimes that's a funding issue, you know, if we, I don't know, want to get together and watch a movie or have a dinner or something like that. Sometimes it's a question of, well, I guess I can say often it's a question that people in my age range and older still aren't all really comfortable going out en masse. And it's because of the historical things that Ashley, you mentioned in part of your intro. We grew up with that mindset that we don't really belong here, so let's be really, 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 really careful. So for that reason, a lot of us feel the need for getting together on our own. We love the allies. So don't get me wrong, you're doing a lot of really great things, but you're not us.
Yeah, I think it's important that we can kind of create spaces for folks with similar and shared lived experiences to connect. And it's nice to see the support of allies and advocates coming together, but I think there's a certain level of connection that folks really want when it's coming together with folks who feel similar in some way to yourself, right? Or have some sort of similar experience, for sure. Matt, I saw that you unmuted as well.
So I just want to bridge from what Joan had said. It is important that we have our own space, but we are part of a wider community as well. And I think it has a lot to do with educating that wider community that, yeah, we're a little bit unique, but we're part of your community too, right? So we should be able to feel welcome in any setting. It's unfortunate that some people do feel like they can't go out and join groups. So it has to do with communication, that we're not that much different than you are. We should be accepted in every community that we go to. And we do have unique and special needs, especially when we get older, because we might be isolated. We might not have the connections that other groups do. So I think a lot of it has to do with communication for everyone. Just all about us.
For sure. And I think and the sentiment also extends like nothing about us without us kind of thing as well. So if we can bring people into communication with each other, get a sense of what folks want and need and desire in terms of the support, so that we can have a range of options for people to access, right? So there is the larger community events, there's the smaller, more intimate meetings as well. And I think that we have some comments in our Q&A that kind of resonate with number one, the communication and getting the message out as well. So one of the audience members suggested that radio and local television kind of be used for that, the advocacy or the repetitive education of the whole community about respect for 2SLGBTQIA+ throughout rural areas, and the importance of getting to know your neighbors, right? Getting to know who they are and what is important to them. And it could and the suggestion is that it could be used across the ways that we identify, whether it's our racial identities, whether it's our sexual orientation or our gender identity. The opportunities are there. So that was one of the suggestions that popped out. Another kind of to echo the sentiments around long-term care that we saw, a family member, this person shared that a family member moved from her community in Toronto, and after a couple of moves was in a local LTC home, and the staff was great. Some of the boundaries needed to be reinforced, and it would have been helpful for someone who understood her in terms of the support being offered there. Someone who understood could visit and also support in that case as well. Some suggestions to check out the work of the Stratford Pride Community Center, and another comment around having that physical space to meet. So educate senior centers in smaller towns and create space. So opportunities to leverage senior centers as well, or seniors active living centers. That's what I think that they're called, and that there's funding for as well. And I think I had promised that we'd have a couple minutes at the end to share some of the things that are exciting and coming down the pipeline for our panelists. So I think we'll do that. And I saw Grace pop back on, so that means we're running out of time. But I think we'll start with Matt, because you specifically noted that you had some stuff that you wanted to share.
Yeah, so we do have some cool news. So recently our town council did finally approve a Pride sidewalk for Goderich, which is a big move for our community. Also, thanks to some background work that AJ did, we saw a map that showed Pride celebrations across southwestern Ontario, and there was a noticeable hole in Huron County. So Huron County Pride has sort of reinvented itself. Take a look at the Facebook page, take a look at the communications. June the 10th next year, there will be a Pride celebration happening in Huron County on Courthouse Square. And to make that happen, there's a fundraiser on October the 29th at the Livery, where we're doing a drag bingo. So take a look. I know, super fun, eh? Especially in Huron County. So take a look at our Facebook page, take a look at our Instagram, buy some tickets. If you can't go, send some money. We're going to make this happen.
For sure. That's very exciting, Matt. I've marked it down on my calendar, so hopefully I'll be able to come out. That'd be so fun. Joan, I know you've got some stuff as well that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I neglected to mention that I run a P-Flag group in Owen Sound, and it's on Zoom right now, which is reflective of the geography of the area too. So people come from as far away as Walkerton and Thornbury quite regularly, and Markdale. In the September meeting, which is the third Tuesday of September, we're having Brian Francis as a guest speaker. He's the author of Fruit and more recently Missed Connections. Great writer, open to anyone. This is. Let's see, and within the local community, we're talking about possibly starting an LGBT choir/singing group and reinstituting the potlucks that we used to do years ago. So you can watch for information about those on the P-Flag Owen Sound website.
All right, thanks so much, Joan. And AJ, do you have anything?
Yeah, so Stratford-Perth Pride, this November, we are holding our first ever Trans Pride Week. So think of Pride Month, but it's trans specific. So it'll be November 13th to 20th. We had our first committee meeting last night, so we're figuring out the exact details. So there will be a trans week of celebration in November. Also, because it's in the Q&A, I want to give a plug to another 2SLGBTQ group here in Stratford, the Stratford Pride Community Center. So they're a newer group as of last year. So they're a physical space for the 2SLGBTQ, not just in Stratford, but Southwestern Ontario. They have events going on quite frequently, and they have like wine and non-alcoholic, or no, cheese and non-alcoholic wine events, book events. They have a librarian who volunteers with them, a bunch of things like that. So you can check them out as well as Stratford-Perth Pride.
Okay, All right, so thank you all so much for your time today, and that's great discussion and sharing. And then I think I will pass it back to Grace to wrap us up.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Ashley. Thanks for creating a conversation around this topic. It's definitely an important one here in County, and thank you so much to the panelists for all of your insight as well. You really highlighted the importance of not only understanding this topic in the context of rural regions and the various factors associated with it, but also the multiple layers of intersection that exist as well within rural areas, specifically highlighting both the challenges and opportunities, which I think is very important. And thank you for providing us with a future-oriented and solution-focused perspective to this issue. It really allows us to walk away with some ideas on how to better support 2SLGBTQIA+ older adults living in rural areas. And I think that's what we need. Also, a huge thank you to our sponsors, DeJager Town Square IDA, the Town of Goderich, Zehrs Goderich, Libro Credit Union, and CIBC Private Wealth Management, as well as MacEwan and Feagan Insurance Brokers. Thanks for your continued support. The lecture series would not be possible without you. And just so everyone is aware, the next lecture series will be taking place on Tuesday, October 4th from 12 till 1, same time. We will have Al Lowe's on discussing rural food insecurity. Thank you so much to all of the attendees for joining today, and feel free to pass this information along to your networks for future lecture series to expand the reach of the lecture series, contributing to the knowledge economy, reducing social isolation, and supporting Gateway's mission of improving the health and quality of life of rural residents. So thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.